What if I told you that SpaceX, the company carrying America's space program on its back, just got banned from launching rockets during the day? Sounds insane, right? But it's real. The FAA has quietly imposed a curfew that forbids daytime launches, claiming it's about airspace safety. Yet behind that excuse lies something much deeper: a system stretched too thin and a policy that could cripple U.S. space dominance overnight. Let's dive right in. When the FAA quietly announced that all daytime rocket launches were now banned, it didn't sound like a safety update. It sounded like a warning, one that could cripple the company carrying America's entire space program. On paper, the FAA called it a curfew, restricting every commercial launch to the hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. But that single line of policy instantly grounded almost 70% of SpaceX's operations. Think about it. Most of SpaceX's missions, from Starlink deployments to Crew Dragon flights, depend on daylight. They rely on stable weather conditions, visual tracking, and predictable wind layers. Take that away and you don't just slow them down, you strangle their rhythm. And what's more shocking is the timing. This curfew took effect just weeks before Starship's 9th flight, the most crucial test to date, the one expected to finally prove full re-entry and landing. Coincidence? Maybe. But when it comes to SpaceX and the FAA, coincidences are rare. Over the years, SpaceX has learned that every breakthrough they make seems to trigger new regulations. Whenever they move too fast, another layer of bureaucracy appears. And this time, it's not just another delay. It's a direct hit on their momentum. Because behind this decision lies a problem the FAA won't admit. They're overwhelmed, understaffed, and outdated. Every single day, more than 45,000 flights fill American skies. Commercial jets, cargo planes, private aircraft. That's over 16 million flights a year, managed by an agency that, by its own numbers, is short by thousands of certified controllers. Many of its busiest facilities are operating 10 to 15% below what's required for safe coverage. When you're that stretched, rockets become an easy scapegoat. It's easier to restrict launches than to rebuild a broken system. But here's where it gets interesting. SpaceX already does most of the FAA's job better than the FAA itself. Their launch automation is light years ahead. Every flight path is modeled, every risk simulated, every collision scenario predicted in real time. The Falcon 9 and Starship systems communicate with air traffic networks automatically, adjusting for altitude windows and crosswinds faster than human controllers ever could. So when the FAA says we can't handle daytime traffic, it's not because rockets are unsafe, it's because the system running them is outdated. And instead of modernizing, they restricted the one company proving how innovation can make the sky safer. Let's be honest. This isn't about danger, it's about control. This is the same pattern we've seen for years. In 2021, SpaceX's Starship flight was delayed because of a missing environmental report. In 2023, the FAA launched an indefinite investigation, just as SpaceX was clearing its test backlog. And now, when everything finally works, when SpaceX is launching rockets like clockwork, they're told they can only fly at night. That's not regulation. That's suppression disguised as policy. But what makes this even more troubling is how much the United States depends on SpaceX right now. Since 2020, every American astronaut sent to orbit has ridden aboard a SpaceX capsule. Boeing's Starliner is still not fully operational. NASA's own shuttle retired more than a decade ago. Without SpaceX, America loses its only independent access to orbit. This ban doesn't just inconvenience one company, it weakens an entire nation's space leadership. And yet, the FAA calls it a temporary measure. But no one's buying that. If SpaceX slows down, NASA's entire Artemis timeline slips. The military's new satellite constellations get delayed. Commercial partners lose launch slots. Every piece of progress America's made since the end of the shuttle era grinds to a halt. All because one agency can't staff its control towers. It's almost absurd. Think about it. SpaceX handled over 130 launches in 2024 and was on track to break 170 in 2025. An unmatched pace in human history. No other nation, not even China, has achieved that. So instead of celebrating this industrial miracle, America's own regulatory body is shutting it down. Not for safety, but for bureaucratic convenience. And that's what makes this story so frustrating, because it's not an accident. There are whispers inside the industry that this curfew wasn't born from airspace data, but from pressure, quiet complaints from commercial airlines, legacy contractors, and political figures uncomfortable with SpaceX's dominance. When one company launches more in a month than others do in a decade, the old order gets nervous. And who pays the price? Innovation. Because while SpaceX is being forced to fly under curfews, China's launch sites operate around the clock. Their system doesn't stop for daylight restrictions. They're pushing new satellites, testing reusable rockets, and expanding their lunar logistics, while America's rockets are grounded at noon. That's not a safety measure. That's surrender. What's even more ironic is that the FAA's decision also hurts companies like Blue Origin, who are still struggling to prove they can launch anything reliably. Their massive New Glenn rocket, already years behind schedule, needs ideal lighting for early testing and booster recovery. With this rule, they lose that too. So if the FAA's curfew was supposed to create fair competition, it's done the opposite. It's punishing everyone, especially the innovators. Let's pause for a second and talk about numbers. SpaceX brings in over $15 billion annually, and analysts now value the company above $400 billion. Why? Because it actually works. It reuses rockets. It flies weekly. It makes profit while others burn cash. Meanwhile, Blue Origin survives almost entirely because Jeff Bezos personally writes billion-dollar checks every year just to keep it alive. This isn't competition, it's imbalance. And instead of rewarding performance, the FAA seems intent on leveling the field by slowing the winner. And that's dangerous, because this small ban could have massive consequences. Every day of downtime means lost Starlink deployments, delayed NASA missions, and commercial customers forced to reschedule, sometimes for months. The ripple effect reaches everything from defense contracts to scientific research. And yet, the public explanation remains thin: staffing shortages and flight conflicts. But here's the twist. Those conflicts are almost non-existent. FAA's own data shows the average delay caused by a rocket launch is just 7 minutes. That's less than what's lost to bad weather or mechanical checks every single day. So again, we ask, why now? Why this? Why target the one company that's actually moving America forward? Inside sources say Elon Musk's team is already preparing a legal challenge, not to rebel, but to force transparency, to demand that the FAA show real evidence that daylight launches pose risk. So far, there's been none. What's really at stake here isn't just one company's schedule, it's the future of American space leadership. Because when regulation replaces innovation, progress stops. And once progress stops, catching up becomes almost impossible. But the FAA seems to have forgotten one thing. SpaceX doesn't back down. Every time they're told no, and that's where the real concern lies. Not just for SpaceX, but for America's entire space industry. A single bureaucratic decision from the FAA now risks slowing down the only company keeping the U.S. at the forefront of global spaceflight. This isn't about rules or safety anymore. It's about momentum. When you ground daytime launches, you don't just stop rockets. You stop progress, innovation, and the very spirit that built this industry in the first place. The irony is painful. While SpaceX continues breaking records, reusing boosters, and slashing launch costs, the very system that should be cheering them on is the one holding them back. Blue Origin can afford to wait. They barely fly. But SpaceX carries the weight of an entire nation's presence in orbit. If they slow down, so does NASA, so does Starlink, and so does America's lead in the new space race. This FAA curfew might seem temporary, but its consequences could ripple far beyond a few delayed rockets. Because in this era, whoever controls launch frequency controls access to space itself. And right now, the United States is risking that edge. So what do you think? Is the FAA protecting safety or protecting its own inefficiency? Let's talk about it below. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Space Update 24 hours for more sharp, fact-based updates on the space industry. Your engagement helps keep independent reporting alive and keeps the truth about space moving forward.